Ellen Hathaway with Kansas Policy Institute, and today I'm here with Dr. Tracy Frederick, who's our Executive Director of the Kansas School Board Resource Center. And so I'm excited to talk to you. For those that don't have a working knowledge of the Kansas School Board Resource Center, could you share a little bit about who you are and what you do and why you exist?
Sure. Well, it's not unusual that people don't know a whole lot about us because we're fairly new. We provide resources for school board members. Our mission is to help school board members be effective advocates for students and improve academic outcomes. And that's kind of where we are, where we plant our flag. We really try to provide information, advice, policy collaboration that prioritizes the needs of students and parents over the institutional desires of an educational system. And so that's a kind of a mouthful. So what we do is that we provide resources, whether that's data to school board members, to anybody, a parent, grandparent, anyone who would like to know about the state of the schools in their district or across the state. So we provide data for them. We provide just individual coaching. I help school board members who maybe are trying to formulate a policy or formulate an idea, or they have a problem and they want to talk it out with someone. And there are not a whole lot of resources available to school board members. Our resources are all free, and so they can call me anytime, email me, and we'll have a conversation about something that's kind of troubling them or challenging to them. Talk to parents sometimes who want to find out how to address their school board or to find out some kind of information. So we provide those kinds of resources, just the one-on-one, having conversations with people about that and helping them think through what they want to do. We don't tell them what to do, but we provide the information for them. We also provide project support. We're working on a superintendent search right now. We provide policy for different school boards. We also provide SMART goal assessment and goal setting, strategic planning, budget, auditing to look at how you can use your resources, building needs assessment, and a lot of other different projects as well, just to help school boards, as I mentioned in our mission, to focus on how to improve student outcomes. That's kind of where we live, and that's where we exist. We're looking at how we can help the schools and how we can help students from the classroom out.
Well, that's exciting. So whether you're just wanting to know what the pulse of education is in Kansas, whether you're a concerned mom, whether you've never been to a school board meeting before and you kind of want to know a little bit more about their role and what they do and what's happening in your district, or maybe you're considering a run for school board,
Right.
or maybe you're on a school board and you have some financial and budgetary questions and need a plan or just some options, or maybe you just want to use Tracy as your emotional support. You sound like a good woman to know. So thank you for sharing. Talk to me a little bit about what you're seeing when you work with school board members. Do they ever discuss with you about the trouble that they're seeing with student achievement in their districts? I know that we talk a lot about, we see ACT college readiness scores in English and reading, math, science, all our core subjects. They've dropped significantly. I think they've dropped 32% in 2015 to just 18% in 2024. So just from your perspective, what is driving the decline?
That's a good question. And first of all, when you you ask about when I go out and talk to school board members about the data, quite honestly, they're shocked. Many of them don't have that data, or that data is somehow, I don't know, gift wrapped in a different packaging so that it doesn't, show the reality of what's going on with students that are walking through the halls of their schools.
Who's doing the gift wrapping?
Well, they may get a report, perhaps from their superintendent. I've had school board members who said, I've never seen these scores. And so then they question that, and I say, well, quite honestly, they come from the Kansas State Department of Education.
That's always the question: is where are you getting this information?
That's where you're getting the data. Exactly. And so I'll send you a link, and that's what I'll do is I'll send them a link, and I'll tell them this is where you can get it. I don't make this stuff up. And so they may get a report that's different, or they may not get those kinds of reports at all. So they may be completely ignorant. I just want to really make sure that we're aware that there are school board members out there who don't get this information, or they're told maybe some round numbers So that can be somewhat shocking to them. And so there's oftentimes that the very first response is, being taken aback and, oh, this can't possibly be true. So then they have to go through this processing of that information. And when you go through the processing of that information, when you get this kind of information, you're going to have two choices. You're either going to accept it or you're going to reject it. I mean, that's something that I taught in my classes when I was teaching in school. When we talk about persuasion, you get information, you're either going to accept it, you're going to reject it. And so you can reject it out of hand because it's going to make you uncomfortable. You're going to reject it because it's going to be hard. It's going to mean that there are going to be significant changes, systemic changes that you're going to have to make as far as policy or, how you spend your resources. You've done something the same way forever, or it's going to make you feel as if you are a failure, that somehow you have let people down. And we're talking about children here. But if you accept it, that, as I said, can be very difficult because you're going to have to make those decisions. You're going to have to accept it. Sometimes it's going to mean that, wait a minute, you mean I've sent my children, my grandchildren, my nieces, nephews, or, these kids that I love, they've been through these schools and they have not been provided the kind of education that I was always told that they had.
Right.
But I will also say on the other side of that, we provide this data, but as I've been working with different school districts and we have community listening sessions, this isn't a shock. It really is not a shock because we have employers who are saying, I can't hire your graduates. I had an employer say in a listening session,
Wow.
I'm really sorry, I can't hire your graduates
Yeah.
because they're not able to count out money. They're not able to do,
Basic
they don't have
skills.
the skills.
Hmm. So, Tracy, we've outlined a lot of the problems and a lot of these numbers and conversation points. They don't completely shock a lot of Kansans. But I do think that a big question that comes to mind is, and I know I've asked you this in at other times, and I just want there to be such a black and white answer. But why has there been so little action from education officials when the data is so bleak?
Well, as we mentioned, as we talked about earlier, it is a really difficult question, to answer because, I mean, for me, it's just absurd. I mean, it doesn't make sense. And for many others, it doesn't either. So for me to be able to say, this is what they're thinking or this is why they're doing this, I just don't understand it. What I can tell you is that we can only judge their behavior. What we know is that the state board of education is not providing oversight. That's their role. That's their job as the elected officials. They are to represent their constituents to ensure that we
Right.
have an outstanding education system in our state. That's their role. When they see that role to the commissioner, then and just say, let's just do whatever the commissioner says, we're not going to hold anyone accountable, then that's a role reversal to what the system was set up to do. So in reality, you have the public, these elected officials, who are the ones that are overseeing the state school system. But in reality, what you have is we have an administrator who runs that. And so
So
they allow
what
that
I'm
administrator
hearing,
to run that.
what I'm hearing, and I don't like this, because I like accountability. I like to know that if my state representative who understands that my parents or my grandparents who are on a fixed income can't afford their property taxes, and so many Kansans can't. And I know if they're aware of that problem and then they go into the legislative session and do nothing to address it because of, whatever reasons they list, then I provide accountability through not electing them again.
Mhm.
So I I know that the State Board of Education, what is it, 10 people on the
Mhm.
board? I know
Right.
that they're elected, but I know very little about those individuals, and I know that's my own fault. How else do we hold them accountable? Do we just not vote for them? And then you also mentioned um, the commissioner right now, who's
Mhm.
Randy Watson, and
Mhm.
they kind of serve as like the chief of the board a little bit, the person
Right.
that goes out and implements the policies to the local school board. Is kind of he or she, the commissioner, are the face of that state board. You said that they're not elected, or how do we choose who the commissioner is?
Right, they're not elected. The commissioner is just appointed by the board. Now, what you find oftentimes is that commissioner's kind of in there for life. So board members will change, they'll be elected, and then people will come in. And so, as I mentioned, oftentimes they'll cede any kind of decision making to the commissioner. The commissioner's been around a long time. And so they want to continue to trust that commissioner, even if they were elected. This is what is so mind boggling to me. Many times they are elected on the stance, on the platform that they're going to cause, or they want to make real change. They want to improve schools. And so once they're elected, I mean, in order for there to be a change, in order for there to be a school improvement, then you're going to have to sit in that seat on the school board and you're going to say, we're not going to do this anymore. Or we're going to ask hard questions, or we're going to push back. Wait a minute, we've been doing this for 10 years. It's not working. What are you going to do different? And holding that commissioner accountable, because that commissioner is to act out or to ensure that all the policies that the state school board implements or agrees on are acted out. And so when that doesn't happen, there's no real change. And so they may be elected on that platform, but oftentimes that doesn't happen. And so there's no accountability structure to ensuring that the public may say we want some kind of change, but there's no accountability structure for that.
Well, and I do feel like in years past, our state legislature has tried to implement
Mhm.
some measures for accountability, just to kind of improve outcomes. I mean, now there is state law where money has to kind of have proof to improve these outcomes. But what happens when they don't do that?
You're exactly right. I mean, so there is the at-risk funding, which you talked a little bit about earlier, which is funding that is supposed to fund initiatives above and beyond, not the same things that are happening in the classroom, but things that are above and beyond to help those at-risk students. There's accreditation. Accreditation is supposed to be tied to school improvement. None of that is happening. So we have the state legislature who's saying, you know what, this is what the public is saying that we want. We want accountability in our schools. We want good schools. We want our students, we
Yes.
want our children, our
It just
grandchildren to be able to go to these great schools. And so we're going to enact this legislation that's going to say, we're holding you accountable. We want these things to happen. And so then it goes to the state board of education and to the commissioner, and you will not find a school that is not held accountable under accreditation or at-risk funding or building needs assessment or any of these other laws that are to push on the state board of education and the commissioner to improve our schools. And so there's no accountability. There's no everyone will be accredited. Everyone will continue to get the at-risk funding. Everyone will continue
it
to
just
go through this cycle that
makes
they've
no
always been doing. And yeah,
makes no
there's
sense. And I'm a sports person. I love sports.
mhm.
I love going to my kids' sports. I loved playing sports. But if it's one thing I know about the sports world is there are consequences in athletics.
Mhm.
If, coaches are all the time replaced if a team doesn't have a
Right.
winning record. I mean, you see it in our higher education in Kansas all the time. Why is it that we don't have that same sense of urgency in academics?
You're
Which
exactly
is also
right.
another thing I hear from parents as well. I mean, in our community, sports are a big deal, but we're also logical. We're like, how are we spending all this money on our athletic programs or even just time and energy when we can't get some of the basic things down in the classroom?
You're exactly right. And that was what I was going to talk about is that we, if you and I did our jobs poorly, if we failed year after year, we would not have a job. You were talking about sports. There's a pretty well-known wrestling team in the state of Kansas that did very well, won state wrestling year after year after year. I knew the coach
The
personally,
Arc City,
and yes, and
everybody, yeah,
one of the hallmarks of that team, I don't know if you know this, is that they did not get new sweats. They did not get new uniforms. Because their coach said, we don't need them. I mean, I knew him personally. He was a farm guy and
practical,
he said they
practical
work, they're
guy.
fine.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I love
And so
it.
he said, um, and so it wasn't about the glitz. It wasn't about all those things that really didn't affect how they wrestled. They focused on what you talked about earlier. They focused on the fundamentals. But right now, what we see is that, as I mentioned, there are all these accountability structures in place that the state legislature has put into place, but they are not being followed. And there's no consequence for that. So I could continue to do my job poorly and just keep getting a paycheck or keep coming to work and just doing the same thing over and over again that is not successful.
Well, and I mean, I don't think it's fair to say that our administrators don't want kids to do better.
Right.
I think a lot of them, um, all of them, I think that they would want our kids to do better. But sometimes, at least historically, with what I'm seeing, the Department of Education in our state and the state board, they they manage perceptions rather than addressing those root causes. Um, and a lot of our legislators, they will avoid voting on reform proposals to protect their chance to get reelected. And so, to that, I would say, um, you and I are in the hot seat.
Yeah.
We're the ones that have to have that sense of urgency and make a change. So,
Yeah, and we're the ones that have to somebody has to speak up. Somebody has to say something. Somebody has to do something. I mean, even the state board of education, they accept licensure from different universities in the state. And there are some of the universities in the state that have education programs or colleges of education that do not teach sound, teaching of reading practices. But they're just accepted and carte blanche with no
so
accountability
I
there
think
either.
we're
So
just
there's so many different layers here of accountability structures that have been put into place. I mean, they've been given this gift. Here's what we want to make sure, that will hold this accountable so that our students will get the best education. There are measures there. They're just not being used.
I wanted to talk to you a little bit about, kind of for lack of a better word, just a crisis in Kansas public education. We talk about it at KPI a lot, we write about it a lot, but to me, it kind of transcends policy debate and budget lines, which is what you deal with a lot at Kansas School Board Resource Center. And it's a literacy crisis, which is affecting more than 150,000 students who right now are struggling with just basic reading skills. And I know it's not just reading, but to me, as a mom with kids in grade school, middle school, high school, um, having a child that is struggling just with their basic reading skills, even if they're behind, 6 months or a grade level, it's it's not a statistic anymore. It's a really big wake up call, and it's concerning. So I'm hoping that, by kind of talking about this and asking some hard questions and sharing data that is real, we can kind of just spotlight some of the voices that you've worked with and the voices within our own organization that are calling for change and what that change needs to look like in order for it to take effect. It's not just a talking point. So
I will tell you that as a former educator, I was a public school teacher in English. I mean, I taught all those classes that nobody wanted to take, freshman, and nobody wanted to teach is, also like freshman English. And I've talked about this quite often when I've gone out and, spoken to different groups is it's rarely that a day goes by, and that seems like an exaggeration, but it's really not. I mean, I think of this student often. Um, but it's rare that I don't think about the student who showed up in my freshman English class. I was a new teacher. He sat at the back of the class and was known for being kind of a troublemaker, behavior problem. Well, I learned pretty quickly he couldn't read, and he was in ninth grade English. There was no way he was going to be successful. He'd been passed on
it's
every single
heartbreaking.
year
Yeah.
prior to that. So you're exactly right. I mean, we talk about statistics. We provide a lot of really good data for school board members, for parents, for interested individuals, who are saying, wait a minute, what's going on here? We produce a lot of data, but what we know is behind every single one of those data points is a student. And I've had those students in my classes, and it's heartbreaking. And, to see them, just as you said, if they fall behind, they struggle continually. And many times that is acted out in some kind of a behavior problem. They just can't be
Absolutely.
successful. They feel like a failure. And so that's just, from there come all these ripple effects in this individual's life so that they finally graduate. Some of them do graduate and they're still functionally, what we call functionally literate. And then they go out and they're unable to secure a job or advance in a job because they just don't have the skill set that they needed in order to be able to advance in their career or to really provide a living that they're able to support their family.
You talked a little bit about when you work with school board members that they are shocked by the data. Would you say that this is a unique problem in Kansas? Like we used to be a little bit above the national average on our ACT, but it's not, it hasn't been true in the last couple of years. Kansas outcomes have been declining while other states are improving. Do you find that school board members are talking about those things, like looking outside Kansas and saying, like, "Hey, other states are incorporating these measures, these policies, and they're seeing real results"? Are they talking about realistic changes eh, just on academic outcomes and performance, or what is it that they're working on if they're not having that discussion?
So typically, when I walk in and talk with a school board, they will say, well, how do we compare? But they want to know how they compare to the district next to them. Are
Okay.
we better or are we worse? Well, what we know is that I wish I had better news, but that the majority of Kansas districts are really not doing well. So I can walk into a school district and say, I'm really, sorry, but here's the reality. Your assessment scores for ELA and math are about 34% or 41%. And they'll say, well, how do we compare to the next district over? Well, the next district over may be 1 or 2 points lower, or they may be 1 or 2 points better. So you can feel better about yourself, or you can feel worse about yourself.
Oh
But
boy.
there's still, the reality is at 30 or 40%. So when you talk about taking Kansas, school boards thinking about, well, where do we sit within a larger picture? There's been, as you see, I mean, that there's been this movement just over the past 5 years, I guess, or so, or even maybe less than that, in which was kind of this national wake up call. I mean, I remember when I was teaching and we knew that our scores were dropping. We knew that we were not competitive globally as we had been in the past, but we just thought, oh, we'll catch up somewhere along the way. We knew that that was happening, but we're kind of at this precipice. There's been this kind of tipping point of, wait a minute, we're not getting any better. We thought there might be an upward trend with all these different improvements and all these initiatives and national initiatives that we have been implementing, that there would be some kind of change. And it does take some time
Well, and they
for
like to
us to
point to
be able to look.
COVID a lot too. I mean, COVID was a
Yeah,
setback, and so for the first 1 or 2 years after COVID, when there was a slight dip, we kept pointing to that. But if
right.
if we look at just 2015 to now, I mean, we were at 99,000 kids struggling to read, and now it's 150,000. So I the shock to me is just that there's no sense of urgency at the Department of Education. A year ago, the education commissioner, Randy Watson, he told our state school board members that they needed to basically party, dance around the Capitol to celebrate our state assessment results that were lower than in prior years. So I'm not completely shocked that school board members are completely shocked when they see these test results because their own leadership, they're celebrating something that's not even real. When you've got 150,000 kids struggling to read, that really should push us into a state of urgency, not a state of like giving ourselves a round of applause. And
Yeah, I'm not quite sure what the applause was for or the dancing was for. I mean, I, it didn't make sense to me. And once again, I mean, I was always calling myself back to these students that I taught and knowing, okay, there's nothing to celebrate here.
And, I want to make it really clear that this is not in any way a criticism of our Kansas teachers. It's not a criticism of students. I mean, my kids are in the public school system. I have had some amazing experiences. I've also seen a lot of teachers really not getting the resources that they need, even if the resource is time. We've allocated budgets to help kids that have dyslexia, that are struggling to read, but we're seeing in our own data that a lot of times those allocated funding for these at-risk students aren't even being used for that. I feel like
You're
anytime
exactly right.
we do a
Yeah.
little bit of digging where we find all kinds of misused funding. And yet I feel like state leadership a lot always points to the money being the whole solution. We can fix this crisis if we just pour money into it. But it's one of the things we talk about a lot is there's not a correlation between spending and academic improvement in Kansas. In fact, we're still continuing to decline.
Yeah, we're looking at, spending in the state of Kansas nearly $19,000 per student. So I was at a school board meeting and that statistic was there and there was an administrator who said that can't possibly be. Well, that statistic actually came from that district, and it was right there on the Kansas State Department of Education website, and the board was really kind of blown away by that. I said, that's not a judgment, whether that's good or bad. We want to spend money, so that to ensure that our students have a good educational environment, have the best quality education. And we do know that there are costs that are associated to that. However, just as I was having a conversation with someone in the state yesterday who said, I just remember that there used to be these one-room schoolhouses, and they were smart and they were entrepreneurials and they were able to be creative. So we have provided a lot of money, and it's not that money is not necessarily well spent, but you're exactly right. There is this disconnect also, I would say, between teachers and between sometimes when we think about the resource allocation, we have the building needs assessment, and we've learned that in that building needs assessment, the way it's supposed to work, the way the state has set it up, is that the school board is supposed to listen to the teachers and say, hey, what do you need in order for us to overcome these challenges and obstacles to meet our outcome needs? Well, that doesn't necessarily happen, and we know that doesn't happen most of the time. So here's an example. I was at a district and working on listening sessions about some issues and talked to one of the groups that the school board was to talk to was teachers. And so we get them into the room and there's a little bit of uncomfortable, people are a little uncomfortable, there's the school board talking to the teachers, and people were quiet until one teacher spoke up and said, you know what, I just got to tell you, can we please have some professional development on teaching reading? And the school board member said,
It
well,
seems
of
like a
course you
really
can.
basic.
Yeah, I know. And so through this conversation, we learned that the teachers thought that the school board would not allocate resources for them to go and get professional development on the latest trends in teaching reading. In fact, the teacher said, we'll pay for it ourselves. And the school board member said, you don't have to do that. So we know that we think about the resource allocation. What we do at Kansas School Board Resource Center is we want the districts to think about funding their schools from the classroom out.